on raining. Levee's gonna break.
Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. Well, you know, a frequent topic of conversation here on the podcast, of course, is climate change. It's a very big deal to me. It's happening everywhere, and it's getting worse all the time. And one of the most recent, most apparent examples of it here in the great Midwest, of course, is this horrific flooding in the western part of Iowa and over the eastern central part of Nebraska. Unprecedented, unbelievable. And the beauty of the podcast is I can help illuminate this issue a little bit because some people aren't paying enough attention because why? It doesn't affect them immediately or directly. There are places even in the great state of Iowa where people don't seem to be overly concerned about this because they're living in suburbia. They're living in a high area that hasn't been affected by the flooding. But I'm telling you, this is not your normal incident of flooding that we have in the springtime. This is flooding caused by climate change, and I don't think it's getting reported enough. The way to think about climate change, what I tell people is don't try to talk about global warming. Maybe don't even talk about climate change. What it is to me, and the best way to describe what's happening, is that it's climate convulsions. It's like the climate is convulsing. We have these extremes, these ups and downs, dry and wet, hot and cold. I mean, okay, we always have that with weather. I mean, I'm not foolish here, but more so than ever. And to me, it's like the planet has an infection. Or maybe a better description would be the planet has a parasite that it's trying to shake off of its climate. And the climate is reflecting that, and it's resulting in all of these floods and storms and wildfires and the melting of the polar ice caps. So here's a nice summary. I mean, really got at it, and this is from CBS News, and Jeff Baradelli is the author. Here's his report, and I quote, "Record-breaking, historic, even biblical. That's how many are describing the scale of flooding in the Midwest, where thousands of people in Iowa and Nebraska have been forced to flee their homes in a region that's no stranger to rising floodwaters, a perfect storm of melting snow, bomb cyclone rain, and climate change conspired to push these floods over the top. As of Monday, 100 river gauges in the Midwest and Mississippi River valleys remained at major or moderate flood stage, with many in record-setting territory. This weekend, the Missouri River at Plattsmouth, Nebraska, just south of Omaha, crested 4 feet above its highest recorded level. So how did this happen? Well, the 2018-2019 winter has been defined by a fairly consistent, stubborn pattern featuring 2 distinct weather regimes. In the West, a roaring Pacific jet stream brought relentless storms and colder than normal temperatures. Over in the East, the opposite weather dominated, with mild and relatively quiet conditions. Separating the 2 regimes was a persistent storm track propelling storm after storm over the Midwest. This persistent weather pattern, boosted by a weak El Niño, combined for the wettest winter on record across the U.S. Up in Minneapolis, snowfall measured 20 inches above normal. Omaha registered its snowiest season on record. So did Des Moines. As a result, the ground was saturated and frozen, making the region a sitting duck for last week's bomb cyclone. The bomb cyclone was itself a historic event, with wind gusts close to 100 miles per hour and record-setting low pressure. It dropped blinding snowfall on the western side of Colorado and heavy rains in the eastern plains and the Midwest, but those impacts paled in comparison to the flooding that it triggered. With a dense layer of snow blanketing areas from Nebraska and Missouri to Wisconsin, the heavy rains couldn't seep into the frozen ground. Along with the melting snow, the rain instead became runoff that caused rivers to swell, further complicating matters. Thick ice jams clogged the flow of the water, causing it to spill over onto adjacent land. While this confluence of events can and does happen in a normal climate, a warmed climate makes it all more likely. And that's because there's more energy and moisture available. We call that stuff in the news business, meteorologists call that juice. There's more juice. Now, last week's bomb cyclone had a low pressure equivalent to that of a Category 2 hurricane. That kind of low pressure is occasionally seen in nor'easters, but rarely, if ever, in storms in the lower plain states. That follows what is expected as the climate changes, spike storms with more extremes. A warmer climate has led to heavier rainfall. Since the early 1900s, annual precipitation has picked up by 15 to 20% in the upper Midwest. But the more important number is the increase in rainfall from the most extreme weather events, which have dropped nearly 40% more rain since 1958. 40% more rain since 1958. While an increase in rain can be absorbed by the ground if that rainfall is spread out over the course of the year, additional rain on top of already heavy events magnifies flooding. In the case of extreme rain, the connection to climate change is simple. Warmer ocean waters evaporate more moisture into the air. A warmer atmosphere holds more moisture. That extra moisture falls as heavier rain. This effect was vividly on display in hurricanes like Harvey and Florence, when rain totals shattered all-time records. Research shows the Midwest is feeling a disproportionate impact from heavier flooding. Going forward, global change models continue to project areas like the Midwest, Great Lakes, and Northeast will see the greatest increases in yearly precipitation in the U.S. The vulnerable parts of these regions in particular will need to adjust expectations for how often that a once-in-a-lifetime flood occurs, because they very well may end up being once-in-a-mortgage cycle floods. All right, so, and don't, if you hear that, say, well, who thunk it? Well, here's who thunk it. You remember Al Gore? Do you remember the first reports of global warming and climate change? Those early reports came out with maps that showed this exactly as it occurs now. It was predicted. It was projected. It was denied by the climate change deniers, and now it's happening. Well, one of the reasons I wanted to start off with that is because this week Cindy Axne, Iowa's newly elected 3rd District U.S. House Representative, held her first town meeting at Valley High School in Des Moines. Like Cindy, she's great, doing good things out there in Washington, D.C., has been on my podcast before. And she wanted to start off by updating everyone what she saw when she toured western Iowa, her district, west and southwestern Iowa, heavily impacted by these floods. Here's Cindy at the town hall.
Well, I'm so glad to be here today, and I've got a little speech, and we've got some Q&A and all that, but what I wanted to first start out with is to tell you a little bit about what's going on in our district with the flooding so that everybody's aware. Because if you've got the time, and of course if you've got the resources, anything that you can do to help our fellow Iowans in our flooded areas of this district would be greatly appreciated. Our team has spent most of this week working with the people in the affected areas. In our district, that's mostly in Pottawatomie County, where Council Bluffs is, and that area, Mills County, towns like Pacific Junction, and certainly Fremont County in towns like Hamburg and Sydney that are really just decimated at this point. So if you haven't been down to that corner of our state, it's wonderful people just like all of us sitting here in this room, incredible Iowans, and they've been struggling to begin with because we know that in so many cases our rural communities have been left behind, and that's something I'm trying to work on. And now they've been hit with this terrible disaster. And so I'd encourage any one of you, if you've got an opportunity, to go to our website where we've got information on how you can help them. We can't list any specific organizations or way to donate just because of the rules that you have, ethics rules. But you can Google, of course, Iowa floods victims, and you can find a place to help out. We met with the American Red Cross yesterday, so I know that they're big supporters and they're helping out in that area as well. So please, do whatever you can, and certainly pray for those friends of ours who are in these affected areas. And I'm going to do everything I possibly can, along with Senators Ernst and Grassley and the governor, to make sure that we bring these people back to a place where they're whole again, and that we cover their economic issues that they're going to be facing. But I'd encourage you to reach out if you can and help those in your own backyard.
And I could do another complete podcast on the town hall itself. It was interesting on a lot of different levels. Again, it's interesting the people that are turning out that are here in Iowa so genuinely and mortally afraid about immigration, I mean, our friends in Texas and California and Florida, places like that, would probably laugh out loud. But the people here in Iowa, particularly the older people, are really terrified about this. And of course, it's because, they're at that age where they get frightened easily, I think. And they're also being fed this disinformation stream from hate radio and Fox News and what I call the ookie kabuki internet sites. And so they wanted to show up and try to hammer Representative Axne on those things. But she's very good at playing those comments off and trying to make people understand that we all got to get along here and get on the oars together in this leaky U.S. boat to make it through not only climate change, but the other issues that are affecting us. And if we don't, if we pull apart, the boat's going to sink. I apologize for that analogy, but that's what I've got for right now. Well, speaking of leaky boats and climate change, after the town hall was over with, I wanted to talk to Representative Axne specifically about this climate change issue. You'll hear my question here, but to better explain perhaps, the point that I was trying to make is I'm always amused, or bemused is the term that I like to use, when I watch television news, network coverage of these calamities, of these tragedies, whether it's a winter tornado someplace that doesn't normally see winter tornadoes, or this biblical flooding in the Midwest that's never seen floods like we're having before. They put these television cameras in the faces of these victims, and they talk about how they lost mom and dad's pictures and the house is gone, and they cry. And I mean, God love them. I mean, that's just fairly standard. But the thing that nobody ever remarks about, the question that's never asked, is climate change. Now, if it was to me and my place was wiped out by a wildfire in an area that doesn't normally get wiped out by wildfires, in a place that's never seen snowfall like it's seen this past year, or flooding like we're seeing now, the first words out of my mouth would be, when are they going to do something about climate change? Because if I pick up my stuff and fix my place and get my life back together here, it's probably going to happen again if we don't address this issue. And it'll happen to future generations. And if I'm a generational family that's been on this land for generations, I probably would like to have that issue addressed. Personally, I don't think it's an act of God. I think it's climate change. And that was the question that I had for Representative Axne. Yeah, it's podcast by George. I'm back. I like standing up here that I'm almost as tall as you. The question I have, you're out there touring Western Iowa in the flooding, and the news media is out there. When they talk to the people, the victims, very seldom, if ever, do they mention climate change. Personally, if my house was underwater in Western Iowa, they stuck a camera in my face, the first thing I would want to talk about is this is the face of climate change. Are those constituents, those victims, are they talking about that with you?
Well, I'll tell you what, they're really just trying to get back on their feet, and which is probably why you're not hearing anything about that. They don't have homes. Entire parts of town are completely wiped out. Businesses aren't even operating. Our farmers have lost money with grain that's sitting in bins that isn't insured anymore and that's ruined now, millions of dollars. I think so right now they're just figuring out how they stay safe and how they fix the issues. We've got what looks to be $1.6 billion worth of damage across our state. It's astronomical. And I think that's probably why you're not hearing anything about, the causes of flooding. And quite honestly, what we had here was three things that happened at the same time. The reservoir up in Gavin's Point that released its normal amount up to its normal amount. At the same time, we had western tributaries in Iowa releasing a ton of water at the same time, and then the Platte River overflowing. But I couldn't agree with you more. We are seeing extreme weather changes because of climate change. We know that we've got to address these issues, and that'll be something that after we get everybody back in their homes, get the places cleaned up, which this is going to be, quite honestly, this is months if not years of, and then the bigger issue is also making sure that we help those towns. There's some towns that are worried that they might not come back.
Yeah, I heard that.
So that's our priority, is to address those issues, and then I'm going to be working with the the Army Corps of Engineers to exactly address what do levees look like, what do structures look like now when we're living in a world of climate change and its impact on severe weather patterns.
weeping moan.
So that's U.S. Representative Cindy Axne at a town hall meeting just this week with an update on the flooding and an answer to a question about climate change from Podcast by George. And that's going to do it. That's all I want to do on today's podcast. I want to end with our good pal, our good buddy, that great musician, Todd Park Moore. That's what you heard at the beginning, by the way. And he's going to take us out here with him on National Steel guitar that belonged to Memphis Minnie, I think in her amplifier as well, as he does that great blues standard, wrapping it up here with When the Levee Breaks. We'll be back soon. Thanks for listening in. That's another podcast by George.